So like Andrew said, my name is Claudia, and my project is the Historical Fremantle Panorama Audiovisual Tours. So I'll begin with some background on my project. Mine's actually based on a previous Hive summer internship project completed by Marcia Schneider, who created the Historical Panoramas website in 2016. So this website allows users to explore historical and modern day panoramas of Fremantle and Perth. As you can see here, these are two panoramas from the website. They're both taken from the tower of the Fremantle Town Hall. The first one in 1891, the second in 2017. And so to explore the panoramas on the website, the user would use a mouse or a touchscreen to zoom in, pan around to areas they want to look at, and click to fade to different years. So this is where my project comes in. So the website is an interactive experience that is really only suited to one or two people to use on a small screen, such as a tablet or a PC. And it doesn't really suit an audience of more than a few people to view on a larger screen, such as the Hive cylinder screen here. Because if one person was to control what a large group of people are seeing, it would become, the movements could be very fast and sporadic and cause some dizziness. So my objective was to create 3 audiovisual tours which adapt the panoramas from the website into these videos that are suitable for the cylinder screen, and also an exhibition in the Maritime Museum about historical Fremantle. So these tours include a voiceover written by historians from the museum, So these voiceovers narrate what can be seen in the panoramas and give a background on the history of Fremantle. And then my job is to edit these together in the tours and edit the movements of the panoramas so they zoom in and pan around to the areas being discussed, as well as using visual effects to highlight what is being shown in the voiceover and what is being talked about. So to give an overview of my process for this project, after first obtaining the files from the website and choosing my editing program, I began to ideate and identify which effects were going to work best and what was going to be most effective in highlighting what was being discussed in the voiceover. And this took some testing, and I'll show you some examples of my tests in a moment. But after I found my chosen effects, I began to apply them to the first audiovisual tour. And then after that, it was really important to meet with WA Museum and show them my progress, as well as have the historian do a recorded reading of the voiceover so that I had an actual audio track that I could align my effects to and my movements. So I had an actual idea of timing. For example, when the effects should enter and exit, how long to hold them for, etc. And then after that, it was of course important to actually export a version of it and test it on the Hive screen so that we could ensure that the movements were gradual and slow enough that no one was going to get dizzy, which was a challenge to also have it be in time with the voiceover and still be slow enough. So to go into my actual process for editing, I chose to use After Effects to edit this project. Initially, I tried to use Premiere Pro, which is another video editing software, but I found that it wasn't as capable as After Effects for dealing with Panorama's large file sizes. And Premiere is also much more suited to video editing, whereas After Effects has all the tools and functions that I was looking for to edit my visual effects. So here are some examples here of some of my tests. The first one on the left is a magnifying glass style effect, which what it did was zoom into a small area that was being discussed in the voiceover, and it created an animated circle that came out and had an enlarged area. I ended up deciding that this was a bit too visually convoluted, and it was actually better to just zoom all the way in and have that area fill the entire screen. The second test here is, you can see some red circles, which were an animated circle that drew around the area being discussed. And this was actually a suggestion from someone at the museum, but I ended up choosing a different effect, which I found was much simpler and more effective, which I'll show you in a second. Pretty much the objective of these effects is to capture the audience's attention so their eye is drawn to the correct place at the correct time. But at the same time, you don't want to overpower the panoramas because they are the focus of the audiovisual tours. So here are two of the effects that I ended up using. These are the ones that I utilized the most. The first is, up the top there, is the replacement to the red circles, which is pretty much an animated yellow line that outlines what is being highlighted. So I don't know if you can tell here, but they're outlining all the chimneys on the houses. And then the second one, in the two images down the bottom here, it's kind of a yellow tinted highlight effect, which I achieved by using the mask tool and applying a brightness and tint to that mask, also feathering it a lot so that it had a blurred edge. And these two effects I interchanged using based on the situation. So the outline effect was much more suited to an object that had a hard edge, such as a building or part of a building, like the chimneys here, whereas the highlight was much more suited to areas that didn't have that distinct, defined border. For example, on the right here, you can see that it's highlighting the rock bar that's at the mouth of the river, and on the left it's highlighting some horses and chickens. And then, yeah, here's some more examples of the effect, using to highlight the road there. And I ended up using lines to highlight these roads down here because they were like smaller roads that were obstructed from view by the buildings, so the lines indicate where they are. Yeah, and then, of course, the second most important part of editing the audiovisual tours is editing the movement. And I did this using keyframes in After Effects, which is, if you don't know what a keyframe is, it's pretty much the way that you can create a slow, gradual transition for your effects and animations. So pretty much the further apart the keyframes are, the slower the zoom in will be, if that makes sense. And yeah, these two effects work well because they are minimal, but they, at the same time, don't overpower the panoramas. And the yellow also contrasts and stands out well against the black and white. So I'll go into a bit about what each tour is actually about. So the script for the first tour was written by Stephen Anstey, who's a historian from the WA Museum. And he chose to base this sequence around the two panoramas that I showed earlier from the view of the tower of the Fremantle Town Hall. First one in 1891, second one in 2017. And so he kind of broke it down into three sections. The first one about housing and the way the houses were built in 1891 Fremantle. As you can see in the second image, the roofs are being highlighted as he discusses the types of materials that we use to build roofs. Secondly, he chose to discuss the lack of sanitisation and bad health and hygiene in 1891 Fremantle, as seen in this backyard here off Market Street, where you can see a man is resting here next to horses and chickens and outdoor toilets and also water wells that are nearby. And lastly, he chose to discuss family life and also the domestic work that was done by a lot of the women, seen here in this backyard, where you can see I've highlighted the washing as it's being discussed. And so the scripts for the second and third tours were done by the historian Mike Lefroy, and he chose to discuss convicts for his first one. And so this explores early convict arrival to Fremantle, as well as some of the buildings that were built by the convicts. And this sequence utilises 4 panoramas, all taken from the old Arthur Head Lighthouse in 1879, 1890, 1902 and 2016. And being able to have all 4 of these panoramas allows the audience to get a really good idea of how Fremantle changed in its early years of colonisation. For example, you can see here in these 2 images, in 1819 and 1902, the commissariat stores is highlighted, which is now the WA Shipwrecks Museum. And you can see how the land gets built up around the building, as well as the addition of the South Jetty, the small jetty, which was part of the early port, which leads into the third audiovisual tour, also written by Mike Lefroy, which discusses early port activity in Fremantle, including gauge roads, the river and sea jetties, as well as O'Connor's plan to put a harbour in the river mouth. And this tour also uses the two panoramas from the Town Hall, 1891 and 2017, as well as this one here from the old Harbour Trust building in 1896. So the two Town Hall panoramas allow you to see a really broad view of the coast of Fremantle, whereas this one gives you a much closer look into the work that O'Connor actually had done to the harbour, including these trestles that he had here, which he was using to blow up the rock bar up here to allow ships to actually enter the river mouth. Because before that, they would have to dock here at this sea jetty, be unloaded, transported along Cliff Street here to this river jetty, where they could then be transported up the river to Perth. So I'll talk a bit about future work for this project. So the voiceovers that are accompanying the tours are actually only a temporary audio track because the scripts that the museum provided haven't been finalised, and so before a new high quality voiceover can be recorded, they will need to be edited and approved by all the appropriate people. There are also only 3 sequences that I was able to create during the time of this internship, so more could be added for the exhibition, which will be in October. I actually started working on one using this watercolour panorama done by Jane Eliza Curry in 1832. And this could be used in a tour alongside a modern day panorama that could be taken from the same location. And the challenge there would be estimating where this was actually painted from, because as you can see, the landscape has changed dramatically since 1832. I would just like to thank my supervisor, Andrew, and my Hive Support supervisor, Wes, as well as Stephen Anstey and Mike Lafroy from the WA Museum for their work on the scripts, and everyone else from the WA Museum who helped me with my project, Donna, Matthew, Renee, and Tanya. Thanks, and that's my reference.